The rhythmic drip of water echoed through the silent kitchen, each drop a reminder of yet another thing left broken in her life. She sighed, tightening the belt of her robe as she stared at the leaky faucet. Divorce had left her with more than just an empty house. It had given her a list of repairs that only seemed to grow. After scrolling through a list of local handymen, she settled on a name. It didn't matter who showed up, as long as they could fix the problem. When the doorbell rang, she expected an older man, someone seasoned with years of experience. Instead, standing at her doorstep was a young man, barely past his 20s, with sharp features and a confident smile. "Sink trouble?" he asked, his voice warm. She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. "Yeah, it's been leaking for days." He walked in with an air of ease, setting his toolbox down as he examined the sink. Rolling up his sleeves, he knelt beneath the counter, hands working efficiently. She found herself watching him, not just his skill, but the way he moved, the quiet confidence in every action. "So, did you try fixing it yourself first?" he asked, glancing up with a smirk. She laughed, shaking her head. "I know my limits." For the first time in a long time, she felt a lightness she hadn't known she was missing. The conversation flowed naturally as he worked. He told her about growing up helping his father with repairs, about how he liked the satisfaction of fixing things with his hands. She shared how she had only recently moved into the house, trying to start fresh after a messy divorce. "New beginnings," he said, tightening the last bolt. "Nothing wrong with that." The leak stopped. He turned on the faucet, letting the water run smoothly before standing up and wiping his hands. "Good as new." She smiled, relieved. "You're good at this." He shrugged, flashing a grin. "I try." As she reached for her wallet, he stopped her with a wave of his hand. "I'll write up the invoice later." "No rush." She nodded, feeling something unfamiliar stir within her. There was something about the way he lingered, the way his gaze held hers just a little longer than necessary. Before leaving, he glanced around. "You might want to check that cabinet hinge, too. Looks like it's coming loose." She glanced at it, then back at him. "Maybe I'll have to come back." A small chuckle escaped him. "Maybe I will." And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind more than just a fixed sink. Something else had begun to take shape, something she hadn't planned for. A few days passed, but the memory of him lingered. She told herself it was just the novelty of meeting someone new, nothing more. But when she noticed a cabinet hinge hanging loose, she hesitated before dialing his number. Maybe it was an excuse, maybe not. He answered on the first ring. "Back so soon?" She laughed, shaking her head. "You were right about the hinge. Think you have time?" "Always." An hour later, he was at her door again, toolbox in hand, the same easy confidence in his stance. This time, she didn't feel like a client. There was something familiar between them now. As he worked, they talked. About little things. About nothing. The empty house felt less empty with him there. "You always do these repairs alone?" he asked, securing the hinge. "Not much choice." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Must be tough." "Sometimes." The conversation drifted toward her past. She hadn't expected to open up, but something about him made it easy. She told him about the marriage that had unraveled, the loneliness that followed. He listened without judgment, without pity. Just listened. When he finished, she offered him a drink, and one drink turned into dinner. They sat across from each other, the kitchen warm, with a scent of home-cooked food. "You didn't have to cook for me," he said, but he didn't protest. "Consider it a thank you." The air between them shifted. He wasn't just a handyman anymore. He was someone who saw her, who didn't look at her like she was damaged or broken. She caught him watching her, his gaze lingering, thoughtful. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked. He smiled. "All the time." And for the first time in a long time, she did too. The rain started unexpectedly, drumming against the windows as they lingered at the table. She glanced outside, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. "Guess I should wait it out," he said, setting his glass down. She nodded, trying to ignore the way her heart raced. The air felt different now, charged, heavy with something unspoken. They moved to the living room, the hum of rain filling the silence between them. He sat close, his knee brushing hers, the warmth of his presence unsettling in the best way. "You don't seem as lonely as you think," he said softly. She looked at him, searching for meaning in his words. "And why's that?" He hesitated, then reached out, tracing a stray curl behind her ear. "Because you have more to offer than you realize." Her breath caught. She had spent so long feeling invisible, unwanted. But in that moment, she wasn't either. The first kiss was tentative, slow, a question waiting to be answered. When she didn't pull away, he deepened it, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer. She let herself get lost in it, let herself believe, just for one night, that she could have something good again. The hours blurred, the rain still falling as they lay tangled in sheets, his arm draped over her. She traced circles on his skin, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But it shattered the moment his phone vibrated. He was in the shower, his voice muffled beneath the sound of running water. She wasn't going to look, but then she saw the name flash across the screen. "Baby, when are you coming home?" Her stomach dropped. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the words, reality sinking in like a weight pressing against her chest. When he stepped out, towel around his waist, the easy smile on his face vanished the moment he saw her expression. She held up the phone, her voice barely a whisper. "Who is she?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "Tell me." His sigh was heavy. "It's complicated." Her throat burned. "Complicated?" He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I didn't mean for this to happen." She let out a hollow laugh. But it did. The room felt colder now, the warmth from earlier erased by the weight of betrayal. She had been here before, trusting someone only to be left broken again. She stepped back, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Get out." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words, but there were none. Without another word, he grabbed his things and walked out. The rain kept falling, but now it sounded different. She stood motionless, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in her mind. The warmth of his touch, the tenderness in his voice, none of it had been real. She had been nothing more than a secret, a passing moment in his life, while she had let herself believe in something more. Anger rose in her chest, pushing past the heartbreak. How had she let herself fall into the same trap again? She had promised herself she wouldn't let another man define her worth, yet here she was, standing in the wreckage of another mistake. She grabbed his glass from the table, dumping the last sip of whiskey into the sink. Every trace of him gone. The sheets, the towel he had used, the shirt he had left draped over the chair. She threw it all into a pile, forcing herself to erase the last few days from existence. But no matter how much she tried, the sting remained. She wanted to scream at him, to ask why he had done this, but what would it change? He had made his choice long before she ever found out. She was just the last to know. By morning, the rain had stopped, the world moving on as if nothing had happened. But she felt different, stronger. She brewed herself a cup of coffee, ignoring the silence of the house. It wasn't loneliness, it was a reminder that she had survived worse. That she would survive this too. Her phone buzzed. A message. "I never meant to hurt you." She stared at it, then deleted it without responding. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for someone else's apology to move on. She had already closed the door herself.